two people can look at the same weather forecast that talks about the probability of snow or rain. One person will conclude that the 50% probability will be on the other side and therefore it will not rain. The other person will conclude that it will rain. Yet they're both looking at the same data. So the existence of a discrepancy is not a sign by itself that something is wrong, because we're dealing with the future. A rating is supposed to be forward-looking as opposed to backward-looking. However, this does not mean that the level of analysis inside rating agencies in general is sophisticated. In fact, I have direct experience of working at a rating agency and also dealing almost on a daily basis with rating agencies, and their level of sophistication is lacking.
It's surprising. You use the analogy of making a weather forecast,
yes,
but this is the equivalent of saying, look, tomorrow will be 25 degrees and sunny, and another person saying it's going to be minus 40 and snowing.
All of these differences should be reconcilable within a framework. Unfortunately, in the sovereign area, which is what you're talking about, there is way too much discretion because there is no framework of analysis. So that opens the door to what I would describe as a rather wishful thinking, some people would say political or politically minded behavior on the part of people who stand on one side or the other of an issue. And that's unfortunate. But that is the world that we live in. It would be different if it were more mathematical, if there was data that would be hard analysis would be possible. But it is not possible, at least not to the level that could iron out all these differences.
Lots of news to get for you today here on RT International. We are back in just a moment. It's RT International. It's good to have you with us today. The brutal executions by Islamic State have drawn comparisons to the increasingly regular beheadings carried out in Saudi Arabia. A top Saudi official has hit back at this massive international criticism, saying that his country executes convicts on a legal basis, unlike that of Islamic State. However, the terrorist group, both the terrorist group and the Gulf monarchy, base their versions of justice on a hardline interpretation of Sharia law. Let's show you some numbers here. Blasphemy, homosexual acts, treason, murder, all punishable by death through beheading in Saudi Arabia and Islamic State. Under both regimes, convicted married adulterers can even be stoned to death. Stealing is also a serious crime in both cases. That is punishable by both guys here with at least the amputation of one hand. In fact, since the start of the year, more people have been publicly put to death in Saudi Arabia than under that of Islamic State. In fact, the Saudi record has been slammed by human rights watchdogs. But Western governments are not very quick at all to condemn the executions, as activist Danny Mackey now explains.
This is not just a violation of human rights, it's a violation of pure humanity. So when Saudi Arabia compares this to a legitimate Islamic way of punishment, then they're no better than ISIS. In my opinion, Saudi Arabia has a sort of political consensus or a deal with the Western countries. They continue to commit human rights abuses, and in return, the West is silent on this for political credit, for a continuation and excellent economic relations. Saudi Arabia, in terms of a human rights sense, is one of the worst states in the world. And the king being deceased and a new king coming into power, this won't change anything, as this is a problem within Saudi Arabia, which is met with genuine silence by the West, and this makes the West complicit in these forms of violence perpetrated by Saudi Arabia.
The use of emoticons can get you arrested, so be careful what smiley faces you use on social media. In fact, a Brooklyn teen, Osiris Aristi, posted a status on Facebook with this emoticon. But instead of an abstract face, he used a cartoon representation of a police officer. Days later, the NYPD arrested Aristi for, quote, making a terrorist threat. The grand jury has thrown out the charges, which carried up to 7 years in prison. Though Aristi is still facing time for illegal gun possession, the NYPD saying they found a weapon in his bedroom when they came to arrest him. The teen's lawyer told us the case is just bizarre.
As of now, there's no precedent, there's no legal precedent or equating emojis with terroristic threats. And I think that's part of the novelty of this case. It's so unusual. It hasn't happened before. The law my client was charged under was designed for real terrorists, like people like Osama bin Laden and Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the Oklahoma City federal courthouse. The statute was directed at terrorism, and so charging a teenager who's posting maybe distasteful things or boastful things on Facebook with making a terroristic threat definitely is an overreach. I don't think that there was any intent in any of the alleged posts that to scare anybody or to frighten anybody or intimidate anybody or coerce anybody, which are the things that you need to do to be implicated under the terroristic threat statute.
With the country still deeply traumatized by terror attacks last month, a leading French anti-racism group is taking legal action over an online job offer. The ad placed by a headhunting site for a graphic design company included the usual demands like organization and motivation, but it also had this: if possible, not Jewish. Now, the site soon removed what it called a scandalous advert and claimed to have been hacked, saying it would never have posted something that discriminatory. But the group that's launching legal action insists this was no hack.
First, they claimed they've been hacked. Then the job portal that published the announcement said it was impossible for anyone to hack the announcement because once it's published, it cannot be modified by anyone. And we made the experiment ourselves. Subsequently, they modified their line of defense, and they said that possibly some intern or somebody just wrote this and they just let it go. Also, a newspaper called them in the afternoon and they said that they didn't want Jews in their company because they wanted somebody able to work late on Fridays and possibly on weekends. So that would explain that they would not want Jews in their company because they suspect they wouldn't work for Shabbat. Several jobs require you to work late at night on weekends, and you just specify it in the announcement. You can have the certainty of having an employee that will work when you need them without discriminating them based on their origin or their religion.
Right, the search goes on for 12 people still missing after a TransAsia Airways plane crashed into a river in Taiwan on Wednesday. Some 60 rescue divers are still involved. These are some of the latest pictures here. Cold weather and rising water levels have been hampering the search efforts. 15 survivors were pulled from the wreckage, though 31 confirmed dead. The jet carrying 58 passengers and crew crashed very soon after takeoff. A United Nations watchdog has condemned Islamic State for killing and kidnapping Iraqi children. The militants are accused of crucifying, burying alive, or selling youngsters as sex slaves. It's also reported many boys under 18 are used by ISIS as suicide bombers. Norway wants to crack down on street begging by targeting people who are kind enough to give money to the homeless. A new law is being considered, which could mean up to a year in prison for anyone donating to the destitute. Malcolm Langford from the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights says many have been left rather puzzled by the new law.
I mean, it's a real surprise to everybody around the world that Norway, one of the richest countries in the world by far, would be banning begging. And we receive a lot of puzzlement from news agencies, journalists and others around the world about this phenomenon. Officially, its argument is it's trying to reduce organised crime in Norway, arguing that, for example, some of the Roma groups who have come from Romania and Bulgaria since the expansion of the EU are engaging in organised crime, and that begging is a front for that. The real reason is probably much more complex, particularly amongst the voters for some of the Conservative parties. There seems to be a clear dislike of particular groups that are engaged in begging, and they don't want to see begging on the streets. I think the police have the powers that they need to tackle organised crime, and in fact a ban on begging would distract them from real serious crime, and they'll be just chasing petty crime and wasting their resources on that.
It's RT International. Back to our breaking news story now for you here on the programme. At least 3 civilians have reportedly been killed, dozens wounded by shelling in the Syrian capital. The attack is thought to have been carried out by a radical rebel group calling itself the Islam Army. We will bring you the very latest on this developing story next hour here on RT International. Well, for now, though, race riots and tension. Coming up here on the network, we look back at the repercussions of last year's fatal police shooting of an unarmed black teenager in Ferguson, Missouri.